James Robertson stood in the marble lobby of the Shanghai International Hotel, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the polished floor as he paced back and forth. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold his phone steady. The billionaire CEO of green tech industries had always prided himself on being in control. But today, his carefully planned world was falling apart piece by piece. "What do you mean you cannot come?" James spoke into his phone, his voice getting louder with each word. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, making him feel even more alone. "This is the most important meeting of my entire career." On the other end of the line, his translator was apologizing over and over again. The man had been rushed to the hospital with severe food poisoning. He was too sick to even stand up, let alone translate the most crucial business meeting James had ever arranged. James ended the call and stared at his phone in disbelief. The biggest deal of his life was waiting just a few floors above his head. A partnership worth $3 billion that could bring clean energy to millions of homes around the world. It was the kind of deal that could change everything, not just for his company, but for the entire planet. But now, without someone to help him communicate, he was completely powerless. The Chinese business leaders who were coming to meet him spoke only Mandarin. James had tried to learn some basic phrases before his trip, but he knew nothing beyond hello and thank you. He had always assumed that in the world of international business, everyone would speak English. After all, he was offering them billions of dollars. Surely they would make the effort to communicate in his language. Now, he realized how foolish and arrogant that assumption had been. These were serious business people who deserved respect. They had every right to conduct their meetings in their own language. James had simply never bothered to think about it from their perspective. Growing up wealthy in London, James had never really had to struggle for anything. His father had built the family fortune, and James had inherited both the money and the business. When problems rose, he had always been able to throw money at them until they disappeared. Meet a better lawyer, hire the most expensive one, want to close a deal faster, offer more money. It had always worked before, but money could not solve this problem. He could offer a translator $1 million right now, and it would not matter if there were no qualified translators available in the entire city of Shanghai. For the first time in his adult life, James felt truly helpless. He looked round the hotel lobby, hoping to find someone, anyone, who might be able to help him. The hotel staff were polite but busy with their own duties. Most of them spoke some English, but not nearly enough to handle complex business negotiations about environmental technology and international partnerships. As James continued pacing, he noticed the cleaning staff going about their quiet work. They moved through the lobby like shadows, barely noticed by the wealthy guests who came and went. One man in particular caught James's attention. He was an older gentleman, probably in his 50s, with dark skin and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything round him. The janitor was mopping the marble floor with slow, careful movements. He worked methodically, making sure every spot was perfectly clean. There was something dignified about the way he carried himself. Even though he was doing what most people would consider humble work, his blue uniform was neat and pressed, and he wore it with quiet pride. James barely glanced at him for more than a few seconds. After all, what could a janitor possibly know about international business? What could someone who cleaned floors understand about billion-dollar partnerships and complex environmental technology? James had always lived in a world where people were valued based on their job titles and bank accounts. In his mind, there was no way someone in such a simple job could help him with something so important. But as the minutes ticked by, James felt more and more desperate. The Chinese executives would arrive in less than 2 hours. He had flown halfway around the world for this meeting. His entire company's future depended on making this partnership work. Thousands of jobs were at stake. The environmental benefits could help save the planet from climate change. James pulled out his phone again and started making more calls. He called his assistant back in London. Hoping she might know someone in Shanghai, he called other business contacts, begging them for help. He even called other hotels, asking if they had any staff members who could translate. But everyone was either busy, too far away, or simply not qualified for such an important meeting. James felt smaller and more alone with each failed phone call. For a man who had always been in command, who had always had people rushing to help him, this feeling of powerlessness was almost unbearable. Time was running out. And James had never felt so lost in his entire life. James continued making one frantic phone call after another, his voice getting more desperate with each conversation. His assistant back in London was working just as hard, calling every translation service and language expert she could find. But the answer was always the same. Everyone was either already busy with other clients, too far away to reach the hotel in time, or simply not available on such short notice. Sweat began to form on James's forehead even though the hotel's air conditioning was running at full power. He loosened his expensive silk tie and ran his fingers through his perfectly styled hair. This was not how things were supposed to go in his world. Problems got solved quickly when you had enough money and influence. But today, neither his wealth nor his powerful connections seemed to matter at all. "Sir, excuse me," came a gentle voice from behind him. James spun round, annoyed at being interrupted during such a critical moment. He expected to see a hotel employee asking him to move to a quieter area or perhaps offering him some unnecessary service he did not need right now. Instead, he found himself looking at the janitor he had barely noticed earlier. The man was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and withered hands that spoke of years of hard work. He was wearing a simple blue cleaning uniform that looked well-worn but carefully maintained. In one hand, he held a yellow mop bucket, and his other hand gripped the wooden handle of his mop. A small plastic name tag pinned to his shirt read William in plain black letters. "I could not help but overhear your situation," William said quietly, his voice calm and respectful. What surprised James most was the man's accent. It was distinctly British, educated and refined. This was not what James had expected to hear from someone in a janitor's uniform. "I speak Mandarin fluently," William continued, setting down his mop bucket carefully. "Perhaps I could help you with your meeting." James stared at the man in complete disbelief. His mouth actually fell open for a moment before he managed to close it again. A janitor, speaking Mandarin, the idea seemed absolutely impossible. James had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years hiring professional translators for his international business meetings. These were people with advanced degrees, years of specialized training and impressive credentials. How could someone whose job was cleaning floors possibly know one of the most difficult languages in the world? "I am sorry, but this is an extremely important business meeting," James said, his tone dismissive and perhaps a bit rude. "I need a professional translator. Someone with proper qualifications and experience." William nodded slowly, showing no sign of offense at James's rejection. His eyes remained kind and understanding, as if he had heard similar responses many times before. "I completely understand your concern, sir. This is clearly a very important situation for you." He paused for a moment, seeming to consider whether he should say more. Then he continued, I was a language professor at Oxford University for 15 years before. Well, before life took a different turn, something in William's eyes made James stop and really look at him for the first time. There was intelligence there, deep and unmistakable. But there was also sadness, the kind of sadness that comes from loss and disappointment. There was dignity too, the quiet dignity of someone who had faced difficult circumstances but had not let them break his spirit. James felt his assumptions beginning to crack. A professor at Oxford, that was one of the most prestigious universities in the world. But if that was true, what was this man doing cleaning floors in a hotel in Shanghai? "Oh, Professor," James asked, his voice softer now, less certain. "Yes, sir. I specialized in East Asian languages and cultures. I spent many years studying in China and Taiwan. I have been speaking Mandarin for over 25 years now." William's voice carried the quiet confidence of someone stating simple facts, not trying to impress anyone. James looked round the empty lobby, then back at William. Time was running out. He had less than an hour before the Chinese executives would arrive, for the meeting that could change everything. His mind was racing, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. "You really speak Mandarin?" James asked again, still hardly able to believe it. Fluently. William replied without hesitation, "I also understand Chinese business, culture, which might be just as important as the language itself. In my experience, many business deals fail not because of language barriers, but because of cultural misunderstandings." James found himself staring at this humble man in his simple uniform, holding his cleaning supplies. Everything he thought he knew about success, about worth, about the kind of people who possessed valuable skills was being challenged in this moment. Sometimes, James realized with growing amazement, help comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person who can save you is standing right in front of you, wearing clothes you never bothered to notice, doing work you never thought to value. The clock on the lobby wall showed that time was almost up. As the elevator doors closed behind them, James found himself standing next to William in the small, quiet space. The numbers above the door slowly climbed from the lobby to the 15th floor where the conference room waited for the first time in hours. James felt a moment of calm, but he also felt deeply curious about the man standing beside him. "William," James began carefully, "you said you were a professor at Oxford University. That is one of the best universities in the world. What happened? How did you end up working as a janitor?" William looked down at his cleaning uniform, then back at James. There was no shame in his expression, but James could see old pain in his eyes. "My full name is Professor William Thompson," he said quietly. "I was a respected linguistics expert who spoke 6 languages for 15 years. I dedicated my entire life to teaching and research at Oxford University." James waited patiently, sensing that this was not an easy story for William to tell. "I loved my work more than anything," William continued, "every day. I got to help young people discover the beauty of different languages and cultures. I published research papers about how language shapes the way we think and see the world. I thought I would retire from that job, that it would be my life's work." "What happened?" James asked gently, seeing the deep sadness that crossed William's face. "Budget cuts." William explained simply, his voice steady, but James could hear that underneath. "The university decided they needed to save money. They eliminated my entire department. Just like that, 15 years of dedication meant nothing. They said they were sorry, but the decision was final." James felt a shock run through him. He had never really thought about what happened to people when companies or institutions decided to cut costs. In his world, when businesses made changes. He only thought about the numbers, not about the real people whose lives were destroyed. At 52 years old, I discovered something very painful, William continued. Being highly educated does not guarantee that you will find another job quickly. Each discrimination is very real, even if people do not like to talk about it openly. Younger professors with newer ideas were getting hired. Universities wanted people who would work for less money. I sent out hundreds of applications. But no one wanted to hire a professor who was getting close to retirement age. William paused, looking out through the elevator's glass wall at the city of Shanghai spreading out below them. My wife, Margaret, developed a serious illness around the same time I lost my job. She needed expensive treatments that our insurance would not cover completely. The medical bills started piling up faster than I could count them. James felt his heart breaking as he listened. Here was a man who had devoted his life to education and helping others. And when he needed help the most, the world had turned its back on him. I had to make a choice, William said. I could keep looking for another teaching job while Margaret got sicker, or I could take the first job I could find to pay for her medical care. The choice was easy. I took a job with an international cleaning company. It was not the career I had planned, but it was honest work that paid enough to help my wife. But why are you here in Shanghai? James asked. Why not stay in London where you know people? For the first time since they had started talking, William smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine and warm. Margaret's illness requires very specialized treatment. The doctors told us that she needed to travel to different cities around the world to see the best specialists. Most people cannot afford to do that. But I had a solution. William adjusted his grip on his mop handle. The cleaning company I work for has contracts with hotels in many different countries. They allow me to transfer between cities when Margaret needs treatment. While she receives medical care here in Shanghai, I work during the day to pay for her treatments. It is not glamorous, but it keeps us together and keeps her healthy. James was amazed by the love and dedication he heard in William's voice. This man had given up everything he had worked for his entire life, just to take care of the woman he loved. In the evenings, when my work here is finished, I volunteer at a community center in the old part of the city. William continued. I help elderly Chinese immigrants who need translation services for medical appointments or government paperwork. Many of them have been living in Shanghai for years, but they still struggle with the language. That is how I have kept my Mandarin sharp all these years. James felt something shift deep inside his chest. Here was a man who had lost everything that most people would consider important. His prestigious job, his financial security, his social status. But William had never lost his dignity or his desire to help other people. Even while working as a janitor to pay for his wife's medical bills, he still found time to volunteer and serve his community. I never knew, James whispered, feeling ashamed of all the assumptions he had made. Most people do not ask, William replied kindly, without any trace of bitterness in his voice. Everyone has a story, Mr. Robertson. We just do not always get the chance to share it. The elevator reached the 15th floor, and the doors opened with a soft chime. The Chinese executives arrived at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just as they had promised. James watched through the conference room window as they stepped out of their black cars in the hotel parking area. There were 5 of them in total, all dressed in dark business suits and carrying leather briefcases. Liu, the lead negotiator, was clearly the most important person in the group. He was a serious man in his 60s with grey hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything round him. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of making important decisions. His team of 4 assistants walked slightly behind him as they entered the hotel lobby, showing him the respect that his position deserved. James felt his stomach fill with butterflies as he watched them approach. His hands were sweating, and he kept adjusting his tie nervously. Everything depended on the next few hours. $3 billion, thousands of jobs, and the future of clean energy technology all hung in the balance. William stood calmly beside James, no longer holding his mop and bucket. He had quickly cleaned up and now looked professional and dignified, even in his simple blue uniform. "Remember, Mr. Robertson," William said quietly, "in Chinese culture, building relationships comes before talking about business. Be patient and follow their lead." When the elevator doors opened and the Chinese delegation entered the conference room, James stood up nervously. He was not sure what to expect or how to begin. But then something truly magical happened that James would never forget. William stepped forward and began speaking in Mandarin, greeting the visitors with warmth and respect. As soon as the words left his mouth, his entire presence seemed to change completely. The quiet janitor disappeared, and in his place stood a confident, educated man who clearly understood not just the language, but the deep cultural meanings behind every word and gesture. The Chinese executives immediately perked up with surprise and genuine pleasure. Their formal expressions softened as they heard William's perfect pronunciation and cultural understanding. They began responding enthusiastically, clearly impressed by the respect being shown to them. Double quotes, "Mr. Liu says he is very impressed that you brought someone who understands both language and respect." William translated for James. "He asks if you understand the importance of building relationships before discussing business matters." This was something James had never considered before. In all his years of doing business deals back in London, he was always used to getting straight to the point as quickly as possible. Time was money, and small talk was just a waste of valuable time. But William gently guided him through the cultural differences, helping him understand that rushing would actually hurt his chances of success. They spent the first hour of the meeting sitting round a beautiful wooden table, sharing tea and talking about family, personal values, and environmental responsibility. William translated every word carefully, but more than that, he helped James understand the deeper meanings behind what was being said. When Mr. Liu asked about James's family, William explained that this was not just polite conversation. "He wants to know what kind of person you are," William whispered to James during a quiet moment. "In Chinese business culture, they need to trust you as a human being before they can trust you as a business partner." James found himself talking about his childhood, his hopes for the future, and his growing understanding of how important environmental protection was for the world. With William's help, these conversations felt natural and meaningful instead of awkward and forced. William did not just translate words from one language to another. He translated meaning, emotion, and cultural understanding. When Mr. Liu expressed concerns about the environmental impact of the proposed project, William helped James realize that this was not just about following government regulations or checking legal boxes. "They are not trying to make the deal difficult for you," William explained during a brief break when the Chinese executives stepped outside to make some phone calls. "They want to make sure you truly understand the responsibility that comes with this partnership. Mr. Liu has grandchildren, and he wants to know that this project will make the world better for them, not worse," James began. To see the entire business deal through completely different eyes. This was not just about making profit or expanding his company into new markets. This was about creating something meaningful. that would help people in both countries and cultures. With William's patient guidance, he found himself having real, honest conversations about purpose, responsibility, and shared dreams for a cleaner, healthier planet. As the hours passed, James watched the formal business atmosphere slowly transform into something warmer and more personal. The Chinese executives began smiling more often. They asked thoughtful questions and shared their own ideas about how the partnership could work best. By the end of the meeting, the stiff handshakes that had started the day had turned into warm smiles and genuine laughter. Mr. Liu even invited James to join him and his team for a dinner that evening, which William quietly explained was a sign of deep respect and trust in Chinese culture. After the Chinese delegation left the conference room, James turned to William with amazement and gratitude. "How did you know all of that? How did you understand exactly what they needed to hear?" William smiled gently as he began putting the chairs back in their proper places. "When you respect people enough to learn their language and culture deeply," he said, "they can sense that. Respect in everything you do. Respect builds trust, and trust builds everything else that matters." The deal was signed 3 days later in the same conference room, where everything had changed. James watched as Mr. Liu carefully wrote his name on the contract with an expensive gold pen, making the $3 billion partnership official. But even as he shook hands with the Chinese executives and smiled for the photographers, James knew that the real transformation had not happened on paper. It had happened deep in his own heart. When he had arrived in Shanghai just a week earlier, James had been a businessman focused only on profit and success. He measured everything by money, power, and status. He looked at people and saw only their job titles and bank accounts. He had been so sure that his wealth and position made him better than others. Now, he was leaving Shanghai as a completely different man. He understood the true value of human dignity and the incredible potential that could be hidden in the most unexpected places. He had learned that worth was not measured by what someone owned, but by who they were as a person and how they treated others. On his final morning in the hotel, James walked through the marble lobby one last time. He was looking for someone very important, someone who had changed his life forever. He found William in the same conference room where they had made history together, quietly cleaning the table where the contract had been signed. William was working with the same careful attention he had shown from the very first day James had noticed him. His movements were precise and respectful, treating even the simple task of cleaning as something worthy of his best effort. He did not know that James was watching him from the doorway. "William," James said softly as he entered the room. William looked up from his work, setting down his cleaning cloth and turning to face James with the same kind eyes that had first offered help when help was desperately needed. He seemed curious, but not expecting anything special. After all, James would be flying back to London soon, and their paths would probably never cross again. "I have a proposition for you," James said, his voice serious but warm. William straightened up, giving James his full attention. "What kind of proposition?" "Mr. Robertson." James took a deep breath. He had been thinking about this moment for 3 days, ever since the contract was signed. "I want to offer you a position as Director of International Relations for Green Tech Industries. We need someone who understands not just languages, but people. Someone who can build real relationships across different cultures." William sat down, his cleaning supplies very slowly, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. After working as a janitor for so many years, after being rejected by so many universities and companies, the idea of returning to professional work seemed impossible. "Mr. Robertson, that is very kind of you, but I could not possibly accept such an offer," William said finally. I am just a janitor. I do not have the right clothes or the right connections for that kind of important work." James smiled and shook his head. "William, you have something much more valuable than clothes or connections. You have wisdom, kindness, and the ability to truly understand people from different cultures. That is exactly what our company needs." He continued before William could protest again. "The salary would be enough to cover Margaret's medical treatments at the finest hospitals in the world. You would never have to worry about money again. And most importantly, you would be helping us build partnerships that actually matter. Partnerships that help people and protect the environment." Tears began to form in William's eyes. For the first time in many years, he could see a future where his education and skills would be valued again. He could imagine providing for Margaret without the constant worry about medical bills. He could picture himself using his talents to make a real difference in the world, helping companies and cultures understand each other better. "But why?" William asked simply, his voice shaking with emotion. "Why would you do this for someone like me?" James thought carefully about his answer. He remembered all the assumptions he had made about success, about worth, about the people around him. He thought about how wrong he had been about so many things. "Because you taught me the most important lesson of my life," James said quietly. "You taught me that real wealth is not about what you have. Real wealth is about what you give to others. You gave me your knowledge, your wisdom, and your kindness when you had every reason to walk away. You saved my business deal. But more than that, you saved me from being the kind of person who only cares about money and power." William wiped the tears from his eyes and looked round the conference room where his life was about to change forever. "I accept," he whispered. 6 months later, William Thompson stood in the beautiful London headquarters of Green Tech Industries, wearing an expensive suit and leading a presentation to international business partners from round the world. He spoke confidently in 3 different languages, helping companies from different cultures understand each other and work together on projects that would help save the environment. Margaret sat in the front row, fully recovered from her illness and proud beyond words of her husband's success. The best doctors in the world had been able to help her because William no longer had to worry about money. James watched from the back of the room, smiling as he remembered the lesson that had changed everything. The most extraordinary people often wear the simplest uniforms, and the greatest treasures are found in the hearts of those we almost overlook.